Hi everyone, welcome to Raw Inspired Living. My name is Kelly. I am so grateful to have you all here. Today we are going to talk about blood sugar because honestly I spent years not knowing that blood sugar was the reason my body felt like it was working against me. Years of eating well, moving my body, doing everything that I thought was right and still gaining belly fat. Still having, afternoon energy issues, still having cravings, still waking up at, 3 in the morning for no obvious reason. And not one person ever told me about blood sugar. Not one doctor, not one naturopath, not one health professional I ever sat in front of. And honestly, it was the missing piece. It was the missing piece that nobody actually mentioned. And today I want to give it to you. So if you're in your 40s or 50s and you feel like your body has quietly changed the rules on you, I want you to know it's not in your head, like I've said before. It's real. And it's not a reflection of your discipline or your effort. Because honestly, I am one of the most health conscious people I know. I've been plant-based for many years. I have a passion in nutrition. I have a background in nutrition and kinesiology. And still, I didn't have this piece. So if you're sitting there thinking you've missed something obvious or that you just need to try harder, please hear me when I say this. Most women in midlife are never told what I'm about to tell you. It's really not common knowledge that I know of because I've been on this journey for 10 years. And the fact that you don't have it yet really is not your fault. What I eventually understood, only after doing the deep research myself, is that blood sugar management changes after your estrogen starts to decline. Not dramatically, not in a way that shows up on a standard blood test as a problem, but in a way that quietly affects almost everything. Your energy, your belly fat, your sleep, your cravings, your mood, your ability to recover. All of it has a blood sugar thread running through it. And once I understood that, everything I'd been experiencing started to make sense, honestly, for the first time. So let's talk about what's actually happening. After 45-ish, when estrogen begins to gradually decline, most of us know estrogen as a reproductive hormone, but what most of us were never told is that estrogen plays a really powerful role in how your body handles blood sugar. Specifically, estrogen supports something called insulin sensitivity. Insulin is the hormone that moves glucose, the sugar from the food you eat, out of your bloodstream and into your cells, particularly your muscle cells, where it gets used as energy. When estrogen was higher, this process was efficient. Glucose moved smoothly, blood sugar cleared relatively quickly, energy was fairly stable. But as estrogen declines, that efficiency changes. Your cells become slightly less responsive to insulin. Glucose doesn't clear as smoothly or as quickly as it did. And what that means in practice is that blood sugar stays elevated for longer after your meals. And when it does eventually drop, it can drop more sharply than it used to. That rise and fall pattern, that spiking and crashing, is what so many women in midlife feel as unpredictable energy or afternoon crashes. That tired but wide feeling that you might have had. It makes no sense when you've eaten well all day. Now here's where it gets really interesting. And honestly, this is the piece that explained so much for me personally. When blood sugar drops, whether that's because you've gone too long without eating or because a meal was too high in simple carbohydrates without enough protein to balance it, or just because insulin sensitivity has shifted, your body needs to stabilize that blood sugar. It can't leave it low. So it does what it's designed to do. It releases cortisol. Cortisol is your primary stress hormone, but it has a very specific metabolic job too. It raises blood sugar back up when it drops, and it does this by breaking down stored energy, including sometimes muscle tissue, to release glucose back into the bloodstream. So in a very real sense, chronically unstable blood sugar means chronically elevated cortisol. Not from emotional stress, just from the pattern of how you're eating, combined with the hormonal changes of midlife. And chronically elevated cortisol does a very specific thing with fat storage. I found this super interesting. It directs fat preferentially towards the abdomen. So central fat storage is actually a survival mechanism because fat stored near the vital organs is accessible quickly in a crisis. Your body, interpreting the repeated blood sugar drops as a low-level stress signal, responds by storing energy where it can access it faster. That is your midlife belly fat. Not a willpower failure, a cortisol-driven protective response to blood sugar instability. I remember when I finally connected those dots, I was sitting with the research going deeper and deeper into what was actually happening in my midlife body. And I kept reading the same thing: estrogen, insulin sensitivity, blood sugar, cortisol, central fat storage. And I thought, oh, that's exactly what happened to me. That is the exact sequence that I actually lived. I had been eating in a way that felt really healthy, but was actually creating blood sugar instability without me actually knowing it. Long gaps between meals, high fruit smoothies in the morning with barely any protein. Fat, I wasn't really measuring my fat, and that's something we'll talk about in a minute. But fat is something that we need to be careful with. All of it physiologically was quietly triggering that cortisol pattern. And nobody had ever framed it that way for me. Nobody, all of the practitioners, nobody really explained it to me in a way that I actually finally understood it. So when I changed the inputs, when I started eating every 3.5 to 4 hours, anchoring every meal with adequate protein, pairing my carbohydrates thoughtfully and measuring my fats, the shift was noticeable within weeks. The afternoon crashes became less severe. I started sleeping more consistently. The belly fat that had been so stubborn started to reduce. And I felt for the first time in years like my body, like I was actually connected to my body again, and we were working together. So I want to name some specific patterns here because I know that many women watching this are already health conscious, just like I am. And some of these patterns are things that look really healthy from the outside, but can be actually worse for your blood sugar stability in midlife. So the first one is long gaps between meals. When you go 4, 5, 6 hours or without eating, or even skipping meals entirely, your blood sugar eventually drops. Cortisol rises to compensate, and that cycle I just described kicks in. In your 30s, it's not so much of a problem, right? But in midlife, with reduced insulin sensitivity, the body is less equipped to buffer those gaps. High fruit smoothies without protein. A smoothie with banana, mango, dates and a handful of spinach, it's super healthy and very nutritious. But in midlife, without adequate protein to slow that glucose absorption, the natural sugars in fruit can spike blood sugar quickly, and then the crash follows. So this isn't about avoiding fruit. I love fruit, but it's about structuring it a little differently in midlife. The next is very low protein meals. Protein slows the release of glucose into the bloodstream. It's one of the most powerful blood sugar stabilizers we have available to us. When meals are very low in protein, which is surprisingly easy on a plant-based diet without some intention, blood sugar becomes more reactive. It's more spiky, more cortisol triggering. And intermittent fasting, which I did, I want to be gentle here because I know this is a practice many women swear by, but for women in hormonal transition, particularly those with existing blood sugar instability, extended fasting windows can increase cortisol. And cortisol, as we've now established, drives central fat storage. For some women, this is the exact opposite of what they need. So what does blood sugar stability actually look like in practice? It's actually a bit simpler than you think it might be, and it doesn't involve a lot of restriction. What it does involve is rhythm and structure. Eating approximately every 3 or 3.5 to 4 hours while you're awake, not grazing constantly, because that's a different problem. But I have usually 4 large meals through the day, right? With consistent, structured fuel windows is what I call them, right? So I have consistent gaps between them, and I eat 4 times a day, right? Those structured fuel windows keep blood sugar steady and cortisol quiet. Anchoring every single meal with adequate protein is also important in midlife. I'm not saying forever you have to, have protein at every meal. I'm not, on this channel, I'm not promoting that. But when you're trying to stabilize a metabolism that is out of balance, it is important. I've realized that it is important, right? So for plant-based women, this requires a little bit of intention. Tofu, tempeh, legumes, a quality plant protein blend. And I aim for around 25 to 35 grams per meal, so for each of my 4 meals. Because protein is the single most effective blood sugar stabilizer we have access to through food. The next is pairing carbohydrates with protein rather than eating them alone. So carbohydrates themselves are not the problem, but unstructured carbohydrates eaten without a protein anchor are what create the instability. When you pair them together, the glucose release is gentler and more sustained. The next one is measuring fats intentionally. And I only ate good fats, but I had a lot of fats. I had nut-based dressings. I had avocado on my salads. I was eating bliss balls with nuts for snacks. There was a lot of fat. So fats are definitely important, but in midlife, excess fats can also slow the glucose clearance. So a measured teaspoon or so of added fat per meal keeps things satisfying without overwhelming your system. These aren't dramatic changes, or they may be to some of you, but if you want a different body in midlife, you're going to have to make some changes, right? What these changes do is address the underlying physiology in a way that most generic nutrition advice simply does not. And I know because I've followed it all and I've tried it all, right? I want to come back to something I said at the beginning. I spent years not knowing this. I've been in this journey for over 10 years. Years of frustration, years of blaming myself, years of wondering what I was actually doing wrong. And when I finally understood what was actually happening in my body in midlife, like the real physiology of what estrogen decline does, especially to blood sugar, and what blood sugar instability does to cortisol, and then what cortisol does in relation to belly fat, I felt relief, like real relief, because it wasn't a mystery anymore. It was a mechanism, and mechanisms can be worked with. Your body is not broken. It is not punishing you. It is doing exactly what a body does when the hormonal environment changes and the fuel signals it's receiving aren't quite matching what it currently needs. When you change those fuel signals, the body responds, not overnight and not dramatically, but steadily. And steadiness is everything. It truly is. This can be done, I promise you, and it can be done, gently and in a nurturing way, which is what our body needs in midlife. So if today's video has resonated with you, if you recognized yourself in what I described, I've created a free guide that goes a bit more deeply into exactly this. It's called Understanding Your Midlife Metabolism. It includes a self-assessment so you can identify where your body might be in this current process that you're in midlife. And it also has a 3-day meal structure built specifically around this metabolic stabilization that I talk about. It's at rawinspiredliving.com/midlife metabolism guide. I'll pop the link in the description below. And if you found this video helpful, please share it with a woman in your life who you feel needs to hear this same thing. Because so many women are working incredibly hard and blaming themselves for something that has a clear physiological explanation. This information changes things. I've seen it change things for me, and I've seen it change things for the women I work with. So I hope that this video has helped you in some way, and I look forward to seeing you again in Raw Inspired Living.